Over the last several years, my journey has evolved. What I seek as I traverse the wilderness of North America has continued to change. I once sought animals and adventure, then peace of mind and heritage. And I still seek these things, yet now more than ever, I seek answers. Answers around the growing questions that surround my life as a hunter. What are the ethics of hunting? What are our responsibilities as stewards of the natural world? As hunters, we have a spiritual reverence for Earth's truly magnificent creatures. My favorite is the Rocky Mountain Elk. They are an incredibly intelligent animal and hold themselves as wilderness royalty. As author Todd Tanner once wrote, fishing and hunting have become much less about the catching and the killing for me, and more about the entire experience. With the increase in vegetarianism and veganism, and the greater scrutiny of the horrors of medical testing and slaughterhouses, the animal rights movement has become more mainstream. Animals have rights in the sense of shared equality. What makes us the same as an elk is that we are in the world, aware of the world, and aware of what happens to us. In that respect, we are the same. As society continues to refine its edges and polish its collective consciousness, the questions over the morality and ethical nature of hunting have become topical. Why do I hunt? It's a question worth pondering, and a very personal one to anyone you ask. I hunt to learn the lessons about nature and myself that only hunting can teach. I hunt because it enriches my life, because it provides the closest thing that I've known to a spiritual experience.
Hunting is a passion. It's the reason I get up in the morning. It's the reason I go to work and I keep a normal job, is so that I can pay for that passion.
Not only does it fulfill a part of me that I need to have fulfilled by being outside and enjoying that connection to nature, but it's a very personal connection to those animals that I'm hunting, and yes, those animals that I'm killing.
Around the world in all cultures, the urge to hunt awakens in boys. They use rocks and make weapons. It teaches young adults the intelligence, beauty, and power of nature. Hunting is a spiritual experience because it submerges us in unapologetic nature. And that experience teaches us that we are participants in something far greater than ourselves. A need for survival and a reverence for nature. For me, hunting isn't a sport, it's a way of life. As Ted Karasote, author of Merle's Door, has written, hunting is a way to be intimate with nature, that intimacy providing us with wild, unprocessed food, free from pesticides and hormones. Hunting provides us with an ever scarcer relationship in a world of cities, factory farms, and agribusiness, and forces us to have direct responsibility for taking the lives that sustain us. I've found that my connection to the land lends a special clarity to the rest of my life. An understanding of how life works and where we fit into the grand scheme of things, my role within the world as a father. as a steward for the next generation and how they interact with nature, and a caretaker of the world around us. The rut is winding down. The vast majority of the cows have been bred, and the dominant bulls begin to excuse themselves from their harem in favor of much-needed solitude and recovery. Many of the herd bulls are now at their weakest. The long rut can take a heavy toll on bulls. With the impending winter soon to arrive, it is essential that the bulls spend their time rebuilding their strength and fat reserves. The smaller harems of cows and young bulls begin to come back together, forming larger herds and preparing for winter as well. For some, a long migration to winter ranges nears as the days grow shorter. Winter can be long and harsh, especially on the youngest and oldest of the herd. Shorter days, plummeting temperatures, and early snow in the high country set the elk on a path to their winter range. Conserving energy is a must if they are going to survive the long winter months. For some, winter is too much. Any injuries sustained throughout the past season are ever prevalent now and can become too much to overcome. The result, a slow and ugly death. The hunting instinct of early humans is a controversial subject. Many scientists have argued that our ancestors' urge to hunt and kill drove us to develop spears and axes and to evolve bigger and bigger brains in order to handle these increasingly complex weapons.
Hunting has been a part of, human culture ever since humans have been around. They've been on the face of the earth at least 20,000 years ago. And the Native Americans that hunted on the same land that we hunt right now, they didn't hunt to go out there and enjoy the scenery. They hunted because they had to. They had to harvest animals to survive.
Because it's only really in the last 100 years that our world has changed so dramatically. Before that, everyone hunted and lived off the land.
When Teddy Roosevelt started the Boone and Crockett Club in 1887, that was at a time when wildlife in the North American continent was at its lowest numbers, absolutely lowest. After Lewis and Clark came up the Missouri River and they went back home to St. Louis and the word spread out what they had seen out here, that's when the rush came out here to the western states, and that's when the decimation of wildlife populations took place. There were no seasons, no bag limits, and people just came out here and terribly abused the wildlife populations at that time. That concerned Theodore Roosevelt, because when he finally realized what was going on and that nobody had any control of what was taking place, that's when he got together with some of his friends who were also hunters to sit down at the table and make some decisions on what can we do as hunters to protect wildlife and take it into the future.
And the hunters stood up and said, you know what? This wildlife is too important to be commoditized to just this little market value. What can a buffalo tongue bring? What can a beautiful feather out of this big male heron bring? That's too superficial. This wildlife has a greater value than that, and we reject it. That is when conservation in America started, was in the late 1800s, when Theodore Roosevelt and a group of hunters got together and said, we're going to change this. We believe that we can conserve and make a difference. And they did.
Nature's cycle is cruel, but necessary. Winter in the Rocky Mountains are long and brutal. Many animals do not escape nature's cycle of life and death. Regardless, it's spring again, and the world is coming alive. Mere survival is behind them now, as fresh shoots of green grass begin to emerge, providing the elk with more than enough food to be content. Every small detail of nature is an essential gear and interconnected. For the first time in months, the elk feel the warmth of lengthening days. Still in large bachelor groups, nearly all of the bulls have shed their antlers and have already started the process of growing a new set. The art of hunting is a year-round love affair for me. When I find antlers in the spring, I like to imagine the battles and experiences they've been through. Running with cows, bugling, and summiting mountains. Successful calving is key to ensure the future of the herd. Pregnant cows wander away from the herd to birth their calves in solitude, which makes them very susceptible to predators. Nearly every predator in elk country are tuned into the calving season and are eager for the easy meal an elk calf can provide. For the first 2 weeks, elk calves will remain nearly motionless, lying in tall grasses. Elk calves are born with spots and without scent as a natural defense against predators. Born at approximately 35 pounds, elk calves can gain approximately 2 pounds per day for the first few weeks they are alive. By the beginning of their first winter, they can gain as much as 5 times their birth weight. Suddenly, people are concerned about where their food comes from. What's in it? What's been sprayed on it? How many thousands of gallons of water were needed to nourish it? Much of the country is in critical drought. Water is as valuable as oil in some parts. Free range, hormone-free, organic, and hyper-local. Do we even know what that means anymore? When the USDA certifies a package of chickens as free range, it means that the chickens had access to the outdoors. There's no requirement for the length of time spent outside, and no guarantee that the chicken ever ventured outside of its enclosure. Wild game remains as nature intended, 100% natural.
As I see the discussion pivot about hunting, non-hunting, I think part of it is people's interest in their food. If ever in my life I've seen people become more interested in where their food comes from, how it's acquired, what its values are, it's today.
Recently, there's been a huge movement for organic food. People want to know where their food comes from. They want food that's natural, that doesn't have hormones injected. And honestly, hunters have been doing that for hundreds of years.
To some people, it's kind of like a bulb went off. Oh, wow, look at this. You can get this organic, non-chemical, non-hormone food.
Most of the available meat at U.S. grocery stores comes from one of the large-scale commercial farms, often called factory farms.
I think we as people lose something when we stop understanding how the natural world exists. And to be honest, one of my greatest fears for our society is this continual degradation of that connection. Our society is becoming more and more urbanized and disconnected from the source of food to the benefits and things that the natural world can deliver if we spend time in it.
The people that are sustained throughout the year through hunting, it's immeasurable. And I don't know what we would do to compensate for that.
How much wild game is actually in, our food stream in North America? And it's really significant. When you think about the animals that we hunt and how many people that feeds. Many hunters, they keep a portion of what they kill, but they give a lot of that away, and it goes to a lot of different people and feeds a lot of people. If you took that out of the food stream, what would that actually mean for this country, for North America? You're talking about putting an additional strain on agriculture in order to produce more, more meat, more beef, more pork, more poultry. And it's just a ripple effect. It's a expense that continues to compound on top of itself. A pound of hamburger becomes, $8 to $10 a pound. These aren't scare tactics, it's just reality.
If there were no hunting, if suddenly tomorrow hunting was banned, and 13.7 million hunters, feeding a family of 3.5 each, had to suddenly go to the grocery store to buy their meat, that would cripple our infrastructure. The environmental impact on our society would be staggering. As temperatures reach their peak and water levels are at their lowest, the elk stay localized in their favorite pastures and conserve their fat stores. Late evening and early morning temperatures are cooler than they have been in months, triggering the bull's instincts to prepare for a long rut ahead. As the days inch closer to September, blood stops flowing to the antlers, and they mineralize and harden. The velvet either falls off or is rubbed off. In most cases, the bulls will find a sapling or shrub of just the right size and shape to rub the velvet off, while at the same time polishing the antlers. Within a few short days of losing their velvet, the antlers will be solid bone, which help protect the bull from the battles that lie ahead. Water is one of 4 basic elements, along with food, cover, and space, that make up what we know as habitat. While water is vital to elk throughout the year, during the persistent heat and long days of July, finding quality water sources is more than a luxury. They use the water to cool themselves in the heat of the day, and will even completely submerge themselves in the water to gain relief from pestering flies and insects. Where there's water, there's life. As the long, hot days of summer begin to shorten, the signs of fall start to emerge across elk country. September marks the rut, or breeding season for elk. As water begins to dry up, it leaves sticky mud behind. Bulls will often use these sites to wallow. Bulls urinate in the mud, roll and thrash around, caking their hides as a way to keep cool and as an act of dominance. Bulls typically will visit a wallow as often as once a day. For those who have experienced it, there is no better time of year or greater exhibition to witness. Tension fills the meadows and hillsides across elk country as bull elk bugle, wallow, posture, and ultimately fight to establish dominance in their position at the top. The bugles from a bull elk are to signal an invite for a female elk to mate. The cow elk responds, and they seek each other out. When cows come into estrus, the mating begins. Every element and process associated with the rut is designed to make certain the most mature, healthy, and strongest bulls breed the cows. A herd bull's job never ends during the rut. Over the course of several weeks, they will take on challenger after challenger seeking to steal their harem. As September comes to a close, many of the bulls begin to show the battle scars of the rut.
Conservation isn't just setting aside areas and preserving them, keeping people out, dividing human from nature. Conservation really is about how we perpetuate the use of the very resources we're conserving. The term comes initially from holding water back behind dams during the spring flood season. So during the dry summer, we'd have water to release to grow crops. We conserve wildlife, we give some level of protection in order to access it later on, to use it later on. We invest largely to keep our sport alive, to keep our passions inflamed, to keep this activity we so treasure and value and identify with available to us and our loved ones long into the future.
As wildlife managers, we work at a population level, trying to conserve populations into the future versus an individual animal. The most important thing we can do into the future is conserve habitat. There are threats to habitat, be it subdivision development, be it energy development. Those things can be done right and with an eye to the future, but we need to consider those things.
We've learned a lesson over and over that if you don't control some of these populations, they will degrade their habitat enough that it will be a long-term degradation that will take decades to ever recover if it does. You want to take care of the habitat. You know that's the driver of all things good and healthy beyond that. And so that's the fundamental issue right there.
All of that has to be based on science. We can't have too many and we don't want to kill too many. And I think that the history has shown that we've done a pretty good job as wildlife managers over the last 100 years.
It becomes part of your ethic. It becomes part of your creed. If I truly am a hunter and I'm dependent upon robust landscapes for my food and my life, I better do something to put more back into that landscape. If I go to my grave and there's some species that's not on this landscape when I go to my grave, we've failed. I want there to be more species. I want there to be greater variety and greater abundance of species.
If we start fragmenting wildlife habitat types to the point where an elk herd cannot be sustained anymore, white-tailed deer populations can't be sustained anymore, then chances are the quality of life for humans in that area can't be sustained that well anymore either. It's important to maintain wildlife habitat because that's a quality of life that counts for humans also.
I think humans innately have a need for that connection with the outside. We have not been civilized for all that long, the blink of an eye. And that's why people have plants in their house. That's why people have pets. It fills a part of our soul that we can't live without.
The funding for the people, the professionals that work on the ground to collect the data, to put the data together, comes from hunters' dollars, not state tax money at all. It comes from hunting licenses, elk tags, deer tags, those kind of things. That's the funding source for everything we do.
Conservation and the elk recovery did not come easily. Scientists have had much to learn about the animal's biology, population dynamics, habitat needs, relations with predators, and the response to hunting. According to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, every year nearly $220 million is distributed from the federal taxes associated with hunting to support wildlife management programs, the purchase of lands for habitat conservation, and hunter education and safety classes. And another $760 million come from the Pittman-Robertson excise tax on guns and ammunition. As a result, in 2014, the United States Fish and Wildlife distributed a total of $1.1 billion in excise tax revenues paid by sportsmen and sportswomen to fund the fish and wildlife conservation and recreation projects across the nation. Those numbers are making a difference. Hunter conservation groups are also working on the front line to preserve wildlands. The total value of the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation's conservation work now exceeds $1 billion.
We have over 200,000 people that I think they have a strong interest in the habitat that we conserve and enhance out there, and they put their money into it by their support of our organization. So there's a lot of other hunter-based conservation groups out there where people are doing the same thing.
I totally understand the passion that people that don't appreciate hunting, don't have that appreciation, or even people that are anti-hunting. I know that they care about wildlife. They have a love of and a concern for, but I think that we need to be able to share the knowledge that we have about wildlife management.
I'm Lisa Kemmerer. I'm a professor of philosophy and religions at Montana State University in Billings. One of my areas of specialty is ethics. In fact, it's my primary area of specialty, where I focus on environmental ethics and animal ethics. There are some real problems with the fact that hunters started the conservation effort, and that's that all of that funding and the organizations that deal with hunting cater to hunters. That is how it works, so that the Fish and Wildlife, they want to escalate target animals. So they're trying to reduce predators and increase target animals. So we need to be honest. Well, we are perpetuating hunting because some people, 5% of the population, really enjoys it. We're manipulating ecosystems in order to maintain the hunt. So then to turn around and argue that we need to hunt to keep the populations down is spurious. It's clearly not, it's not a fair argument.
Conservation could be considered not totally altruistic. There's a self-serving aspect to it, but that's a self-reinforcing aspect. That's a give and a take.
So there's a natural kind of marriage between those who are really interested in restoring big game populations and Fish and Game Department. The fact that the hunter was one of the first folks to step forward, not only put their blood, sweat, and tears and money toward something that they truly believed in, nobody else was at the plate. Sure, maybe it was directed toward some interest in establishing populations that could be hunted down the road, and other populations were able to benefit from that. The fact is, because of their efforts and their money to try to bring these other populations back, look where we are. And I don't think hunters should apologize for that.
Now, I'll be the first to say that if someone truly needs to feed a family, I don't care how they do it. If you're hungry, you should eat. And I would never say you shouldn't hunt because, I don't know, for some reason it's wrong. If you're hungry, you eat. But of course, most hunters aren't going to go hungry if they don't eat the meat that they're hunting. They're hunting because they enjoy hunting. Their point of view, they're entitled to that. But actions that actually infringe on the majority, that's not okay. They have to remember that when they take a deer, they're taking my deer. That's not their deer. That's public lands and those are public animals. But when they go out there with a gun, I can no longer enjoy that animal that they've killed. So you talk about everybody having a right. Where's my right to these public lands and the 95%, or if you want, the 90%, to go onto those public lands and have them unchanged by the hunters who are now holding sway?
We share so much in common with those that we philosophically oppose. If I were to take an ardent anti-hunter and an ardent deer hunter and start a list of what they valued, what was important to them, abundant outdoor space, or high quality water, or sustainable ecosystems, or beautiful vistas, we'd go far down this list until we got to the distinguishing point that says, no, I would not pull the trigger. But the whole antecedent list of conditions they share and they work forward together. And if we can embrace our differences there and not bring it down to a single issue vote or a single moralizing component, then we can meet a lot more of the needs of society, and the aspect of conservation can be rolled out to a much larger audience.
If we're running out of money and we need that money for conservation, we need to look where the real numbers are. And there's 6 times as many wildlife watchers as there are hunters. So we need to start collecting that money and putting that into conservation.
I think there's been a widening now of the focus for the agency. And in honesty, I think there's been sort of this awkward struggle to try to figure out, how we still maintain a relationship, and a strong one, with the hunting, the traditional hunting public, but serve all these other interests that have been growing as well.
It would be much better, rather than being antagonistic, that is only counterproductive for the future of wildlife.
Our differences and diverse perspectives make up what we are as humanity. So do our shared beliefs and values. When discussing conservation, we have many shared beliefs with opposing viewpoints. It's important for both sides to exercise empathy, to try to understand why someone may have an opposing point of view, and to respect it. We might find that we're closer together than we are apart. As society continues to progress, the very idea of hunting has become grossly misunderstood. The honor and sacred ceremony of hunting has been replaced with automation and agribusiness. Primitive is mistaken for barbaric. Yet hunting is what has kept mankind alive and allowed us to thrive.
I was 14 before I shot my first deer. And it still strikes me, and it's hard today. Talk about, I walked up to that deer, instead of her brown, just sparkly eyes, I stood there and watched as they became this bluish green, which told me it had died. And I walked around the bush and I started just crying because I felt that bad about what had happened. I wasn't mature enough to understand the whole picture of how it all fit together, how that was going to be food. I wasn't able to reconcile, wow, look what I just did, but this is what's been happening on this planet for eons. And over the course of that next year, as we ate that deer, I became able, and my mind started to grasp really what hunting was and how it fit in my life and how it was going to be a part of my future forever.
These are the times in my life when I am 100% totally in tune with my surroundings. As John Muir said, the clearest way to understand the universe is through a forest wilderness. Every scent, every sound, every detail, texture, movement, shimmering light, and swift of the woods. We become one with the animal. There are few moments in life where we have the opportunity to tap into the universe so deeply, to be part of nature's cycle, to walk the land as our ancestors did thousands of years ago. It is rare in today's world to be able to return to the basics of universal principles, to be a part of the most fundamental process of life, the food chain. To experience the full cycle of life as an essential cog where everything is connected. If hunting was all about pulling the trigger, I would have stopped a long time ago. In hunting, the animal commands respect. Thousands of hours of practice for one clean shot. Honor it with reverence. Watching the life fade from an animal is stilling, humbling. Every hunter feels remorse. Taking a life is never in vain. The moments after taking an animal, there are a flood of emotions, and that will never cease. The day I don't feel remorse after a kill is the day I stop hunting. I give thanks and gratitude to that animal. I give thanks to the ecosystem that provides this nourishment for my family. It's full circle.
I think as you grow older, you kind of go from wanting to get that harvest to realizing what those animals go through on a daily basis to survive the whole year. And you get to that point where you're going to take its life. There's a sense of deep respect of what that all entails. It's not to be taken lightly, and hopefully I never do.
The hunting community has a responsibility not only amongst itself, but also to those outside of hunting. That responsibility is respect.
We should never forget, it is a huge responsibility and it's a privilege. Some states have it in their constitution nowadays that we have a right to hunt. I still view it much more as a privilege. And it's a privilege that could be taken away from us very easily. We need to respect it and we need to honor it.
And what it really comes down to is society determines what role and what value we have in hunting. So if we can't provide some values other than just, oh, I shot this really big animal, if that's all it is, society is going to reject us. Are you concerned about the wildlife? Are you concerned about the landscape? Are you doing it for purposes that are deep and meaningful to you? And are you committed to making the entire picture more robust, more beneficial for the next generation so that hunting continues to have this important place in our society? And if we as hunters aren't committed to being better stewards, better citizens in the bigger society of hunting,
we got a very short path we're going down. And any hunter who stands here and says it's none of their business, it's their business.
If this goes away, it's gone forever. Conserve another piece of land, fix another ecosystem, help a fishery, help a wildlife culture that needs help.
As hunters and fishermen, we need to become leaders, to open humanity's eyes to the problems we face, so our children can enjoy the same natural world we've enjoyed. Hunting and fishing are absolutely real when so much around us has become less so. For every river and stream, and forest and meadow, for every kid who's ever dreamed of trout or grouse or elk, for every sunrise we witness, every step we take, and every bugle we hear. The truly important things are the same things we share with our ancestors. None of us know what's at the end of the road. But we don't live for the end. We live for what we've been blessed with right now. And for what we can build for our future generations. To this end, one thing remains consistent: the need for a continued pursuit of conservation. It's a lifelong commitment to protect the same lands that awaken our souls as humans amongst a vast tribe of animals. For without our wild lands, we cannot enjoy life abundantly. The earth provides us with a magic and majesty that kindles a forgotten flame in our spirits. With gratitude and respect, we go forth.